Hi everyone. Welcome to the Live Long podcast, where we have conversations to show you how your health is your power. My name is Erin Hunter, and I am the editorial director here at Live Long Media. I am joined today by Dr. Gillian Goddard, a board-certified endocrinologist at Park Avenue Endocrinology and Nutrition, and the author of the popular Savvy Patient newsletter and forthcoming book, The Hormone Loop. Dr. Goddard has more than 15 years of clinical experience on the impact of endocrine diseases. Think about diabetes, metabolic disorders, how they affect women. But today, I'm really excited because we're going to talk about GLP-1s and the endocrine system and long-term health and longevity. So, GLP-1s, Ozempic, Mounjaro, these are the weight loss drugs, the diabetes drugs that get all the renown, all the conversation, but we're going to separate fact from fiction today. What's realistically good about them? Do they support healthy aging? And hopefully answer all the questions that you might have. So before we dive into that real quick, just if you want to learn more about optimizing women's metabolic health, and that's at any stage of life, please consider joining us at the Live Long Women's Health Summit on April 17th and 18th in San Francisco. You can get your tickets using the link. So, without further ado, Dr. Goddard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with a banger. In one sentence, your opinion, one sentence, are GLP drugs, quote, from what others have said, a longevity drug?
I think the jury is still out on that, but we have mounting evidence that they do a lot of things that could potentially increase longevity and health span.
Okay, right. And I think that's a really grounded, middle of the road answer because there's a lot of hype, which is fabulous
Mhm.
because you want new things that are going to help people. And not only that, be easy to use, once a week. But they're a miracle a lot of times. They're claimed to be a miracle. And I want to dive into the logistics, the in and out, the who, what, where, and why of GLP-1s and who they're actually beneficial for.
Sure,
So, to start, just can you tell me why GLP-1s exist in the first place?
sure. So GLP-1 is a hormone. It's made in the cells of our gut primarily, and
Oh, I'm
it's
sorry, real quick.
made,
What does GLP-1 mean? Can you spell?
yes.
Thank you.
It is glucagon-like peptide 1, and that is what GLP-1 stands for. Glucagon is also a hormone. It's made in our pancreas. And both GLP-1 and glucagon help our bodies to manage blood sugar. And so for a long time, we knew that this hormone existed. It was actually discovered in the late 80s. We knew the hormone existed, and we felt like there was real possibility for treating diabetes with these medications or with this hormone. But our own GLP-1 in our body only lasts on the order of minutes. It's a very short-lived hormone, which doesn't make it ideal as a medication. And so it took some time, but in the 90s, a group from the Bronx VA discovered that the venom of Gila monsters, which are from my native state of Arizona, the venom of Gila monsters contains a very similar hormone to GLP-1 called exendin. And that was actually the basis for the first GLP-1 that was ever created called exenatide. Exenatide was actually approved to treat diabetes in 2004. And so ever since then, there's just been more and more drugs added, added to the class. But originally, it was really for treating type 2 diabetes. The fact that it helped people lose weight was something that came along not too long after that. As an endocrinologist, I know we were always interested in that potential, but they didn't they weren't approved as weight loss medicines until 2014 was when the first one was approved for weight loss, Saxenda.
And so now it's taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And that one of the questions everyone's talking about is, should healthy people use them too? Is there a magic in them where not only does it help folks with diabetes and now to lose weight, which is a new indication, but is there a certain preventative, proactive attribute to it? Can you explain a little bit about what the science says right now and like how are
Yeah.
you feeling there?
Yeah, so I think the reason people think about that is because even people without diabetes and people without overweight and obesity often see metabolic changes sort of starting in midlife and beyond. And one of the things that we're realizing is that metabolic changes just don't manifest as type 2 diabetes. They actually manifest in our bodies in lots and lots and lots of different ways. Metabolic disease drives a lot of heart disease, it drives a lot of stroke, it drives probably a lot of dementia and cognitive decline. And so while we don't traditionally think of things like dementia as being metabolic diseases, it turns out that they probably are. Um, so right now, people are just starting to collect good, evidence that's placebo controlled from bigger randomized trials. In fact, at the end of last year, two big trials on dementia were reported. Unfortunately, one of those trials did not show a benefit of GLP-1s, but the other trial, which is an earlier stage trial, did. And I think that there's a lot to be learned from comparing those two trials and thinking about those two trials together and what was different about those two trials and why we might see those differences. I'm still hopeful that we will find that GLP-1s will be beneficial for preventing cognitive decline. But when you think about the things that lead people to, that shorten people's lives, it really is metabolic disease for the most part, heart disease, stroke, dementia. These are sort of the big things that shorten people's lives and affect people's quality of life in their later years too.
Is that because of hormones? Like in your opinion, is it environmental? I mean, I know diet, fitness, sleep, all those impact it, but the risks just continue to exponentially go up as we age. And so GLP-1 use, is there a certain excitement about it because once you hit those more dangerous thresholds, it could reduce the inflammation and the risks of the metabolic disease in the first place?
That is the hope. The hope is that, so, in midlife, part of the reason that we see this shift is because for a couple of different reasons. For women, it has a lot to do with our hormonal shifts. As endocrinologists, we like to think everything is hormonal, but in this case, it really
Not
is.
biased.
um, but but really, in midlife, when women are going through perimenopause and menopause, the shifts in estrogen levels lead to an increase in accumulation of fat in the midsection, which can increase our risk for metabolic disease. Men naturally tend to gain weight more in their midsection throughout all their lives, but people tend to gain more weight in midlife, and that formation of fat around the organs in the midsection really drives this metabolic change. That metabolic change leads to, when we're not properly metabolizing on the cellular level, it creates a lot of free radicals, and free radicals cause a lot of damage. they call in the like cleanup crew from the white blood cells to come in and kind of mop up the mess. But in mopping up the mess, you actually, lose some cellular integrity. In some places, we can regenerate cells, but in our brain, we don't seem to be very good at that. And that is why um, when we think about prevention in a lot of, that when we think about prevention and cognition, prevention, I think, is really going to be the name of the game. And when the time is to think about taking a medication to prevent or to prevent the progression of dementia is kind of what we're trying to figure out right now.
So I'm understanding. The idea is that GLP-1s, by taking them, even someone who ha is showing signs of dementia, this could actually fundamentally slow it down.
That's the hope. Some of the trials that looked at people with later stage dementia did not see a slowing in progression. And the thinking was that at a certain point, the damage has been done and you've lost too much brain mass, too many brain cells to sort of compensate for that in the long run. But the thinking is that if you intervene when people are in the very early stages of dementia, that you might really be able to slow progression. It was very disappointing to the one of the trials called Evoke was a big trial of 3,000 people looking at oral semaglutide, um, and using that in hopes of slowing prevention. I actually think that there's a number, we haven't seen the full data from that trial, but I think that there's potentially a number of reasons why we didn't see what we were hoping to see, which was a benefit. Some of which may be related to the fact that they used the oral version of the medication, which is different from some of the injectable medications.
Okay, so it seems to be the injectable GLP-1 medications work better right now, but it's showing signs that at least it
At least in the early stage trials that we have, there's a phase 2 trial, which is like not the step for FDA approval, but the step before that, looking at liraglutide, and that trial did show benefit. And so it may be that there's differences in the molecules. Liraglutide is actually the GLP-1 that is closest in chemical makeup to our own GLP-1 that our bodies make.
And what does that manifest as? So, like less hunger, or when you talked earlier about helping with diabetes, does that support blood sugar? Like, what does that look like in the body?
Yeah, we don't totally know everything that GLP-1s do in the body because we're finding receptors in new tissues all the time. But the original reason that they were developed for diabetes is because GLP-1 tells the pancreas to make insulin. It helps the body to be more sensitive to insulin, and it helps the insulin that the pancreas makes last longer. It also, we then realized, has effects on the gut, how quickly food moves through the gut, and how the body absorbs blood sugar, or sugar into the blood from the gut. And so you end up stabilizing blood sugars. And if your blood sugars are high, you also lower them. Now, if your blood sugars are not high, you may not lower your blood sugars, but you can still stabilize sort of the ups and downs. We're always going to have ups and downs in our blood sugar. That's normal. I know people are very into wearables now and watching their blood sugar
Hmm.
go up and down. And I think there's a real misconception that your blood sugar should be like a flat line all day long. It shouldn't, but it should gently undulate like a hill and not look like spiky mountaintops. So,
What
and
causes
GLP-1s help with that.
what causes the mountains?
Yeah, insulin resistance causes the mountains. So a delay, so we eat a simple carbohydrate. It hits our blood sugar very, very quickly. That happens whether you have diabetes or not. If you like ate a bunch of jelly beans or drank a soda, like a regular soda, your blood sugar would go spiking up even if you don't have diabetes. What happens then, though, is depending on how much insulin the body needs, the pancreas will make insulin. If you have insulin resistance, it's going to keep making more and more and more insulin to try and keep that blood sugar normal. And what ends up happening is the blood sugar then falls sort of dramatically, um, instead of gently rising and falling. Um, there are things we can do with our diet to get rid of the mountaintops. And I think that's a lot of what people are interested in when they're using wearables. We can increase fiber, protein, and fat in our diet and reduce simple carbohydrates. But medications like GLP-1s also help calm the mountains and create those like rolling hills that we're looking for.
So, a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast and read about longevity, they fundamentally do everything right. You've got the right diet, all the fiber, you're exercising, you're sleeping. Yet, I have to believe that many people still have trouble losing some of that weight and some of that fat, more so than weight, more so than BMI. The fat you're talking about that can contribute to metabolic issues down the line. Um, why does that happen, even if you do everything in the longevity playbook?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a question that for a long time we didn't appreciate. When I took my endocrine boards many, many years ago, questions about people, there would be like a question like, so and so has a body mass index of 30, and they say that they're creating a caloric deficit. They're eating a high fiber, low carbohydrate diet, and they're not losing weight. Why? And back then, the answer was because they're miscalculating their calories and they're not actually in a caloric deficit. But in the intervening years, we found that's probably not actually true. That there's a huge genetic component to this. It's the one thing we really cannot change. And that actually the insulin resistance probably causes both the weight gain and the metabolic dysfunction. It's not that the weight gain causes the metabolic dysfunction. So you can have metabolic dysfunction, you can have insulin resistance, even if you're doing everything right, if you have the correct, if you have the right genetic makeup. And so then you can be doing everything right and you cannot be losing fat.
And what are some of the genes? Like, if people did gene testing, do they know what that is?
No, and it's probably
Ugh.
not one gene. The place where we're getting the most information about this, which is really, really interesting, is actually among women with polycystic ovary syndrome. Because, we know that this group, many, not all women with polycystic ovary syndrome, but many women with PCOS have insulin resistance and are at high risk for diabetes and metabolic disease. And so we're starting to get some sense there around sort of a cohort of genes that may contribute. But outside of that, it's often very difficult to pinpoint the genes that are causing the issues in these types of cases because it's often many genes. And it's not, and sometimes, many times, it's not that you have the gene, it's how the gene is turned off or turned on in your cells, which is a process that we call epigenetics. And a lot of epigenetics actually takes place in utero.
Oh, so when you're
So,
not
so it's
you're
already
not
been
existent
done.
in the world yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And it often has to do with exposure to blood sugar and to nutrition in the uterine environment. So obviously not an area that, we have a lot of control of, especially at this point in our lives. And it's an area that we're just really starting to understand.
I can, and you know what? I can understand how GLP-1s then can really, from a healthy aging and longevity standpoint, help so many folks who might, even if you can't know which genes they are, you've felt hopeless for a while being able to reach your goal, yet
Yeah.
they are a longevity drug in the sense that if you can prevent this genetic insulin resistance, well, gosh, I mean, that's that's great. That it works, right?
We think so. Like I said, the long-term data, I mean, we have at this point, we have more than 20 years of data of people taking these medications who have diabetes. And we have amassed a lot of literature around how um, GLP-1s reduce the downstream metabolic effects of diabetes in people with diabetes. They reduce liver disease, they reduce kidney disease, they reduce cardiovascular disease. And so we have a lot of information in that group of people. We have a growing literature around people who have overweight and obesity. Again, in that group of people, they prevent and treat liver disease, they prevent cardiovascular disease, they contribute to, all of those things are big contributing factors that affect our long-term health and longevity. What we don't have a lot of data on yet, but I think we're collecting it right now, is if you if you are not overweight, or if you don't have overweight or obesity, if you don't have type 2 diabetes, if you but you do have metabolic disease,
Mm.
do GLP-1s benefit you then? And I mean, my instinct is that they do, but I don't have the data to back up my instinct just yet. We will, though.
So if a patient came to you with um s- let's say they were healthy but maybe had slight overweight and they asked you if they should go on a GLP-1 or if they requested it, would this be something they can do even if they technically don't have the prerequisites? Or
So it is. I mean, I tend to look at people much more holistically. I think that BMI is probably not our best metric to use. I know that that is what insurance companies use to decide if people can have GLP-1 drugs covered for them, but it probably isn't the best or only metric we should be using to decide who these drugs are best for. And I think that the people, if you are have overweight and you're starting to show signs of metabolic dysfunction, maybe your cholesterol is getting a little high, maybe you don't have diabetes, but you're pre-diabetic, or your fasting glucose is starting to get too high. These are places where I think probably there is benefit, even if you don't technically meet the criteria. But I think you have to, when you consider whether it's appropriate for someone, I think you have to think sort of at a more global level about the whole patient in front of you, and not just think about body mass index or blood sugar. I think there are a lot of other signs that people have metabolic dysfunction.
if let's say they don't have metabolic function, but let's say you are a woman in peri or menopause, or maybe you're
Hmm.
after. Is that, even though there's no signs of dysfunction, is by virtue of the human body, is that a sign that maybe they should consider a GLP-1 because the risks of metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease are greater?
So I think that's an interesting time to reassess. I think this is an area where you really have to look at the person in front of you. Because remember, the other big problem that women in particular face as we age is osteoporosis and frailty. And so we have to make sure that we are not treating metabolic disease, but forgetting about the fact that osteoporosis and frailty are also significant risks for women as they age. And we have to balance the pros and cons of a GLP-1 in that setting. And so I think that, if a woman has a strong family history of diabetes, I think if she's gaining weight, then that might be a consideration, depending on the whole picture. But I think if you have a healthy woman who's at a healthy weight, just because she's in perimenopause or menopause is probably not the right reason to start a GLP-1 because I worry about bone and muscle loss, which could contribute to osteoporosis and frailty in the future.
And those are symptoms, those can be symptoms of taking a GLP-1. You can become at risk.
You can. I think that the discussion of muscle loss has been a little lacking in nuance um, because we we tend to think that more muscle is good. But if you think about someone with obesity and maybe they're looking to lose 50 pounds, just for a round number, um, they've been carrying around that 50 pounds in their everyday activities all day, every day. And it takes more muscle to conduct your daily activities when you are carrying around an additional 50 pounds. If you could take that 50 pounds off like a vest and do your same everyday physical activity, then you would lose some muscle because it takes less work to do your daily activities in a smaller body. That's okay. But where I think people get into trouble is I think a lot of people use these medicines without incorporating lifestyle change. They're not necessarily following a healthy diet. They're not necessarily focused on making sure they get an adequate nutrition, and they're not necessarily doing strength training exercise. And so when you lose muscle because you are essentially not eating enough and not exercising adequately, there I think we can get into trouble. And that's the kind of muscle loss that I think is problematic.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for the context. That's important. And there is nuance. That's amazing. And I never even thought about the idea that you inevitably have to be stronger if you have for a long time been carrying around a little more weight. And
Yeah.
so there might be some repercussions by the
Yes.
rapidity of
M-
loss.
Well, and my goal for my patients is not necessarily to hold on to every muscle fiber, but to have a healthy body composition at the end of their weight loss that is healthy for where they are at that point. So, a balance of making sure that they maintain an adequate amount of muscle while primarily losing fat.
Right on. Excellent. So I want to round this out with a rapid fire. Are you willing
Sure,
to do that for fact or fiction?
absolutely.
Okay.
I'll do my best. As you can tell, I'm not always the best at rapid fire.
No, no, this is okay. As the idea is that it's not an hour long per answer. And I think you'll be amazing at that. Okay. Microdosing GLP-1s. Are there benefits? We'll look at both metabolically healthy and maybe metabolically less healthy people.
Sure, the answer is the same for both. There's actually no specific definition of microdosing. Nobody actually knows what
Oh,
microdosing is, and there is zero data on it. So we don't
then
know.
the Enum has commercials for microdosing.
A lot of places have commercials for microdosing. They're not based on any real evidence.
Okay, all right. How young is too young to start a GLP-1 and how old is too old to potentially start a GLP-1?
So I have started people on GLP-1s in their 80s when it's been appropriate. I would say there's probably no too old. It's more looking at their overall health. Again, you want to be really careful about contributing to frailty. But I think, in an older population that is not frail and does have metabolic disease, there's a role for these medications. Certainly in the trials that they're doing on dementia, the patients are all typically in their 60s and 70s. Um, Too young. I mean, the critical piece of making decisions in teens is really, again, their global metabolic health. Semaglutide as Wegovy is approved for weight loss in kids as young as 12. Um, and I think that there are situations in which that's appropriate, but I think we have to be really careful about considering the whole child and considering the fact that for many people, once they start these medications, it's difficult to come off of them. And so I think we have to be really careful about how and when we utilize them in kids. But they're safe and there is data using them on children as young as 12.
Okay. Who, as to be as, I guess, blanket but inclusive as possible, who do you typically recommend GLP-1s for?
Mhm.
And yeah, we'll keep it at that.
Okay. I mean, certainly I use them broadly in patients with type 2 diabetes. Obviously, if people are experiencing overweight and obesity and they're starting to see problems, health problems because of their overweight and obesity and are looking to lose weight, GLP-1s are bar none the best option, in my opinion. I know that there's lots of studies and lots of discussion about bariatric surgery versus GLP-1s. In my experience, I end up with patients who've had bariatric surgery who then end up needing GLP-1s too. So it may not be an either or depending on the situation. I think that women in midlife who are gaining weight because they're developing metabolic dysfunction are great candidates for these medications. Women with PCOS who have insulin resistance and overweight or obesity are great candidates. Um, I think that we're only going to see more and more situations in which we deploy them.
Okay, and then
I
last
wouldn't put
question.
them in the water just yet, but
You would okay, last question. From a healthy aging longevity standpoint, GLP-1s, what would you hope to see? What would you need convincing of for them to be prescribed as, quote, a longevity medication?
yeah, I would like to see more data that supports that supports the idea that they're beneficial for brain health. I think the cardiovascular data is pretty convincing. The liver data is convincing. I love to see that cognitive piece really sorted out. I am hopeful that that will happen despite the negative results of the Evoke trial, just because there is some other promising data out there. But that's sort of the piece that I'm waiting for.
Excellent. Thank you. That was good. That was I'm stuck on the microdosing. No one knows what microdosing is.
There's,
I mean, you
it's
see
not that no
ads
one
for it.
knows what it is, it's that there's no actual definition. My theory is that they just mean what's considered a subtherapeutic dose, but nobody actually has defined what microdosing is.
Hey, you should be the first. Do it. Dr. Goddard, define what a microdose is. Let's make it known. Just as a broad spectrum to close out the conversation, what is one thing you do on a daily basis to support your own healthy aging and longevity?
I sleep. I give myself a bedtime. I get at least 7.5 hours of sleep every night.
It's that's a good answer. It's a tough one. The last person I spoke to had a great recommendation about having a sleep calendar. So you know how
Oh,
you mark out
hmm,
meetings on your calendar? Well, she says, no, no, I gotta mark out my sleep. And
yeah,
my mind was blown. I thought that
yeah,
was just what a way to look at this thing that is a necessity for your health, but how to
yep.
prioritize it. Put it on the calendar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sleep. So these days, because nobody smokes, I believe that sleeping is the best thing that you can do for your long-term health.
And then kids, an endocrinologist says sleep. We all know. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was a real treat of a discussion.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye.